If you run a company or you're self-employed and you've ever paid a penalty charge notice or any other kind of fine from the company bank account, you might have a bit of a problem, so make sure you stick around to the end of the video to find out why. Now, I'm not talking about parking charge notices. They are slightly different, and I'll explain the difference and come back to those afterwards. But first of all, welcome back, and if you are new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you understand law and on occasion helps to keep you out of an otherwise sticky situation such as this. So many of you might think that if you get a fine and you pay it from the company bank account, that's just run-of-the-mill for everyday business because sometimes you have to incur these fines. However, the first-tier tribunal has previously found that although there is some merit in an argument that fines are incurred as an ordinary part of business, it concluded that penalty charge notices are not an allowable expense for corporation tax or tax for running your own business. That is because they are not wholly and exclusively for the purposes of trade. And also, more fundamentally, because they've been issued because you've broken the law. And it's a fundamental principle that breaking the law cannot be allowable as a company tax expense. This means that if you get any kind of penalty charge notice, emphasis on the word penalty, or any other kind of fine whilst you're out driving that is outright breaking the law, you cannot use this as a company expense, and you cannot mark it against your profits for the company, and therefore any expenditure should not be deducted from those profits before the calculation of corporation tax. Although if you have a good accountant, they will already have done this for you. But if you happen to be in the position of doing your own accounts or think you are going to do your own accounts because you've decided to save money and get rid of your accountant, then it's things like this that you may not otherwise have known that might trip you up. And therefore, it's probably a good idea in the long run to keep your accountant to keep on top of these things. And there are lots of different scenarios where you might end up with one of these fines. For example, there might be loading and unloading restrictions in certain areas, which you may fall foul of if you're not familiar with the area. Stopping on red routes and bus stops are another common example where people receive fines unwittingly because you don't realise that in some areas there are red lines and you just haven't looked or noticed. Even in some situations, people have found themselves with fines simply because they are parking over a footpath and blocking the access. A lot of these decided at the first tier tax tribunal was between HMRC and G4S, where during a 2-year period between 2008 and 2010, there were roughly 10,000 of these penalty charge notices each year, and they were treating these as an allowable business expense for corporation tax. Obviously, the odd fine here or there may not mean much at all, but when you add this up for many thousands of penalty charge notices, it can have a significant effect on the company profits and therefore the ongoing corporation tax that becomes due. Now, as promised, I did say that I would come back to parking charge notices and the distinct difference between those and penalty charge notices. As I've indicated in previous videos, the emphasis is on the word penalty. A penalty is usually something awarded against the offending party. So a penalty is a punishment of sorts, whereas a private company cannot, of course, issue you with a penalty or punishment of any kind. Therefore, the only way a parking charge notice is enforceable is through the court, because it ultimately comes down to a commercial agreement between you, the person parking in that car park or on the premises or whatever else the contract is for their temporary license of leaving your vehicle on that premises and breaching those terms. Now, many people have disputed the principle that when you enter a car park, you are accepting those terms and parking your vehicle. But in all but the most exceptional cases, those arguments are going to fall flat, because unless the signs are very tiny and on the other side of the car park where you can't see them, by contrast, if these signs are clear and located at the entrance and equally throughout the car park, and there's every opportunity for you to see them, you are going to be deemed to have accepted those terms when you enter and park on the car park. Therefore, any breach of those terms simply amounts to a breach of contract, for which they would have to sue you if they want ultimately to get the money from you. I wouldn't recommend arguing with it if you've actually breached those terms, because if they ultimately do take you to court and prove that you've entered the car park, you've parked your car, you've impliedly accepted the terms of parking and then gone on to breach one of those terms, such as overstaying or parking outside of a bay, they are going to have a fairly slam dunk case against you in court, unless, as I say, you can prove that these signs were too small, too obscure, too far away, or simply non-existent. But how, you ask, does this apply to company expenditure? Because one hasn't, in this situation, technically speaking, broken the law. One has only breached a commercial agreement with another party. Well, the argument is really yet to be tested properly in court. However, the initial consensus on this seems to be that a parking charge notice is probably just another allowable business expense and is probably not going to be treated in the same way. And one final thing that's worth bearing in mind is that if a company reimburses a director or an employee for a fine that we discussed earlier, this is likely to be treated as a taxable benefit in kind by HMRC and should be noted as such. So I hope that was useful. Please do remember to like this video and subscribe. That helps my channel grow and I am immensely grateful. In the meantime, thank you for watching.